Kia ora koutou. Ko ala Kahu tōku ingoa. Really nice to be talking to you today from Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And the presentation that I'm going to give you is an extract from a research project that I've been involved in with an Australian university, where first year students at that university talk about their experiences. But instead of talking about it just in an interview, we used metaphor and photos to get a kind of overarching view. So hence the title, A Journey, a Roller Coaster or a Car Crash. If you're at this conference or you're interested in this work, then odds are you know how difficult the first year is for students at university. And as the stats show, a large number of them don't succeed and either don't complete their first year or don't come back after the end of it. And we know that there's an awful lot of complicated and interacting variables that are influencing that transition and making it hard for students. So what this study was aiming to do was take a little bit of a step back from the little facts of daily life to get a sort of a holistic understanding of their experience at university. The technique is called photo elicitation, which is a fancy way of saying using photographs as a kind of trigger during an interview process. The reasoning behind it was that emotions and experiences, emotional type experiences, are often easier to express in a kind of visual form. As Vila says, photos speak a language of emotions and meaning. And we know that the first year at university is an incredibly emotional experience, and so the student emotions are important. So this method, research has shown, have done comparisons, have shown that photo elicitation can actually elicit richer and deeper reflections from participants than just straight interviewing. The other benefit that we were interested in is that it's also shown to be a more engaging and interesting process for participants. This interview was part of a longitudinal study, and so the students in this study had been interviewed every week since the beginning of the semester, beginning of the year even, and this took place in the second semester. So we were looking for a way to mix things up a little, make things a little bit more interesting and give them a kind of, maybe get them to look at their experience from a different angle. The second aspect to the research design, along with photo elicitation, was the particular emphasis on metaphors. Metaphors are incredibly important to human experience. They are often visually mediated, so it works well with the photo elicitation. And as Sfar says, we live by the metaphors we use. So what that's saying is that metaphors don't just depict our reality, they actually have a role in shaping our reality. So if we can better understand the metaphors that students use, then maybe we can use that to better shape their experience. Who were these participants? There were 14 of them, of the 19 in the wider study who were available that week. They were all straight from school, so they were 17 to 18 years old at the time of the research. About half of them were first in their family to come to university, and they were studying a range of disciplines, arts, science, paramedics, all sorts. They were all Australians of European descent. Actually, no, one of them was a New Zealander of European descent. The tool that we used, the photos that we chose to use, were neutral photos. You can do things like you can get participants to bring along their own photos, but instead we chose to give them a range of photos to choose from. So this is a set called Picture This. They're absolutely beautiful. Got some here for you. They're just, you can see that they're big and they're just gorgeous photographs. We pre-selected about 40 of them, fairly randomly. The whole set I think is close to 80. Spread them on a table and said to each student in their interview, choose 3 or 4 that best represents your first year experience. We then interviewed them, so it wasn't just the photo, they then got interviewed to explain their choice and to build on what it was about the photo that resonated for them, and follow-up prompts to get them to talk a little bit more about it. The analysis was essentially a thematic analysis, but driven by a particular focus on the linguistic and the conceptual metaphors that the students used. So some of the metaphors were represented by the image themselves, that, as in the picture, was a metaphor for their experience. For some, the picture was quite a realistic thing. But we also were interested in the metaphors that the students used spontaneously in their talk about their experiences. So this is the 3 themes of the finding, the 3 kind of dimensions of life that the students talked about: their life, the whole life, their university life, and then within that, their learning or knowledge acquisition that some of them, and not others, were doing in their first year at university. The photos that I've got there are representative. They are the most commonly chosen for each of those 3 themes, but there were many others as well. It was quite diverse, the students' choice of photographs. So life was the first dimension. The really noticeable thing was that the students talked about this as a new life, or a grown-up life, or even real life. Isaac puts it quite nicely, just forcing yourself sort of to grow up and like, you can't really mess around anymore. This is life, sort of thing. It's like everything that happened before when I was at school, that wasn't life. This here is life. And you kind of get a sense here from Isaac that there were challenges associated with that. It's forcing yourself to grow up. They wanted to, but at the same time, they didn't want to. On the positive side of the growing up was the sense of freedom. They talked about this life as being a free life compared to their past life. The opportunity to do things myself, to think for myself and plan for myself and not be babied. When you're in high school, you're still developing as a teenager and you get told what to do all the time. Of course, they're 17 years old now, no longer developing as teenagers. This freedom came across in terms of the whole of life. So they talked about not having parents telling them what to do, but also in the educational setting as well, not having to go to school from 9 to 3 each day. So that sense of freedom to make their own way in the world. But as anyone who's been a grown-up knows, the grown-up life isn't all a bed of roses. It can be, to use a metaphor, it can be quite challenging. And Carla, I think, sums that up beautifully. It really sucks having to sort of take care of yourself. It's all really new to me and it gets in the way, and I focus more on, like having to work and so that I can live out of home instead of university. So this transition that they were going through to adult life was actually a barrier for some of them to the transition to university, because they were having to also focus on managing their money, figuring out how to feed themselves, working to financially support themselves, at the same time as they were having to figure out the university world that they were entering into. The photos on the top two on the left, the guy doing his tie-up and the cutlery were ones that the students chose to represent this grown-up life. Another challenge was the sense of juggling. Now, we've all used this metaphor at time, juggling different roles in life. I like how Mia also used the sense of roles and tasks being objects again, just like when you're juggling them, but this time the objects, instead of being thrown in the air, were being squished into the container of time. You're kind of squishing everything into a week or a month, work, friends, family, uni, just life, and trying to relax at some stage. So you can really get a sense there of the difficulties when all of those squishy balls, they're juggling balls in my head, won't fit into that container of time. The roller coaster, I haven't got the image there, I'll show it to you later, but the roller coaster was chosen both to represent the whole of life and to represent university. Matthew here talks about how the roller coaster is getting more comfortable now, and this is the sense of it being a transition, that life was getting easier. I don't live with mum, I don't have my safety net now, sort of thing. When I started it was hard, but now I've been on the roller coaster for a while, it's normal, and I don't want my safety net back. I suspect mum is still a safety net, by the way. But I think he really captures there the idea that this is a transition. One of the things that was talked about by 4 or 5 of the students was quite interesting. There's this idea that out of high school, in this new context that they were in, they actually got the opportunity to interact with more varied people. So people who were not so much like them. Melanie, who was a creative arts student and really embraced this metaphor idea, chose the box of pastels that you can see down the bottom there, and talked about, so my colours had been kind of constricted and now they're becoming, it's like an open pencil case. So they talked about meeting international students, students who weren't like them, also older students. They found them quite interesting as well, and it was that opening of their minds and their lives that they were really appreciating. So that was life. Within that, they talked more explicitly about university, and the most common metaphor, perhaps unsurprisingly, to describe university was university as a journey. Heidi really embellishes this beautifully. Uni is a journey with turns and twists and the different weather. It's snowing, for example, and you go through hard times, but I can see it's kind of going up a hill, and you get to a point where you can see a view and you kind of stop. You haven't made it, but you're on the way. There's so much packed into this metaphor, isn't there? This idea that there are things that are outside of her control, the turns, the twists, and the weather, but this sense of destination, that she is going somewhere. You are on the way, and that there are moments when she gets to recognize that she is making progress. So those little successes on the way of the bigger kind of journey that she is on. This idea of the destination of the journey came through quite strongly and quite varied for the different students. So for some, it was about getting a degree, as Elizabeth puts it. That is such a life accomplishment. For others, it was about the career that they already saw themselves as part of. Isaac, this is what I really want to do in life, and I really enjoy it. So this wasn't future, this was now. Whereas for Alison, She had a career in mind, but she didn't see this time at university as part of that. This was a stepping stone to where I want to be in the real world. So now you get the sense that university is not the real world. The real world comes later when you get out into the workforce. Luke also was interested in the workforce quite explicitly. He wanted a degree to get a cushy, easy job. The destination matters. Rollercoasters came out a lot in this idea of the university. The ups and the downs, the highs and the lows. And those ups and downs were actually quite extreme. As Zara talks about the contrast between fun and it suddenly got really terrifying. So you had this fun, pleasure, excitement, anticipation, and then you had this fear, anxiety, terror, stress at the low end of the roller coaster. The things that were the highs were the social life, but also getting grades. Students talked about when they got that good grade and what excitement and what a buzz that was. The lows were the stress of the assignments, the deadlines, the pressures of life, as I've just talked about before, and the kind of relentless nature of it. And of course, this idea that university is expected to be fun is one that is unsurprising that students are sold on, because the movies do this, right? University, what do you call it, Michael? America, I can't think what it's called. The university experience as being fun. And I think our marketing people also have a tendency to position university as fun. Not saying it's not fun, it's just not all it is. And they were quite clear on that as well. Sometimes I feel like this, like everything's just on fire. It's burning, it's crazy with all the stress. Stress was a really common theme, and they chose a range of pictures to demonstrate that. There's the burning house that you can see there, which is the one that Sienna and a couple of others chose. The roller coasters were talked about in stress. There was also car wrecks that were talked about as stress. So that idea of stress went right through the students' interviews and their choice of images. The third theme, which again is kind of a subset again, was when they talked about their learning, or more particularly their acquisition of knowledge. And here, knowledge was depicted as stuff. So again, you've got this using of physical metaphor to help represent abstract ideas. And they used the word stuff, but they also used language and verbs that construct knowledge as things, as material things, that their job was to acquire, was to gather and stuff inside of their heads in any way that they could. This didn't come through as strongly in the choice of images, although the top left one of the shredded paper was Tony's, and he chose that because it was all the notes from his study which represented the sheer volume of content. So there's that sense of stuff in that word of volume. And another student chose the dry, cracked earth to represent the dry content in one of their courses. This idea of knowledge of stuff came through right through whenever they talked about their learning. It was described, as I say, as having volume, as being dry, as being connected or disjointed. And then they also constructed a stuff when they talked about how they were acquiring this knowledge. That knowledge was seen as something that the teachers had and that they either gave to, threw at, or in worst case scenario, even dumped on the students. And I think what's really striking here is the absolute passive nature of the student in this process. This idea of knowledge acquisition being what learning is about is an idea of learning that we're trying to move away from. We're trying to move away towards a more kind of constructivist view where we co-construct the learning. These students, there was no sense of co-construction in their talk whatsoever. It was very much there's this large mountain of stuff that they had to acquire and get inside their head somewhere. It was easier when that stuff was relevant. You see the physicality again that lines up or fits. That made it easier for them to acquire it. Stays in her head, sticks in my mind. All these metaphors of adhesion and sticking and staying. But there was a real sense, as I say, of no control and also of lack of time. We didn't have time to cement that in your head. You've got no time to absorb what we're doing. This lack of time was a really common theme. Even in terms of students, a couple of students chose pictures of a clock as a very non-metaphorical image to represent their experience. And she said that she would like to freeze time so that she could catch up. So this idea of time moving away from them and it needing to stop because they were always getting behind. Carla chose the image on the bottom left there of the guy in the water. And she was describing the learning process. The water just carries you away. Like the weeks go on and you just have to go with it. And like they're giving up all new content and you just take it. So the lack of control that she's feeling in the learning process is really quite clear in that one. So it was like the curriculum, the content was moving away from them, and they were struggling to keep up with it so that they could gather it in, but they were perpetually behind, and if they could just stop that flow, then they might be able to catch up. So that's the messy, complex reality that our first year students are negotiating, and you can see why they find it so hard. A few conclusions. It's tough. It's a roller coaster. I think the important point is that two things. One, that the destination matters. The problem with the roller coaster metaphor is there is no destination. You're going around in circles, which is a bit disturbing. But the destination matters in terms of whether you're trying to get a degree or a job. And I think we need to talk with students more about both the destination, but also about enjoying the process. A critical thing is this idea of the dual transition that we need to be considering more, this idea that our students are facing a whole lot of other transitions in their whole life that are separate to but very intertwined with the transition to university that they're going through. And as I say, a key theme here was lack of control. Lack of control of the stress, lack of control of their life load and the number of things that they're juggling or squishing, lack of control of their learning. Students very much as passive people on this journey, passively acquiring knowledge. The last thing I want to point out is that we all use the student journey metaphor quite a lot. You Google it and you'll find, as I've got here, many university websites talking about the student's journey, the 5 key elements of every student journey mapping, the international student journey. And I think that resonates with students. We all talk about life as a journey. It's a really commonly used metaphor. But I think we need to be a little bit more upfront about the nature of the journey, that it will be a variable and challenging journey because the best journeys are variable and challenging, and that's what makes them more rewarding. It will not be, as that is pictured there, this cruisy stroll up a rainbow-coloured, smooth pathway. And we also, as I say, need to emphasise that, again, like all good journeys, it's not just about getting to the destination, it's about enjoying the journey itself. And within that, we need to think of ways to emphasise the agency and the control and give some agency and control to our students in the choices, the pathways that they take on their journeys or how they deal with the obstacles in their way, and give them opportunities to exercise that agency and feel that sense of control. If you've got questions or thoughts, then I am freely available. My contact details are on the screen right there. Please do get in touch. The findings of the study have also been published in Active Learning and Higher Education, and that's the link there. But again, if you want a copy of that, please do just get in touch with me. If enough people from the Hertz conference get in touch with me and want to, then I'm really happy to host a Zoom session. So if that's something you're interested in, flick me an email or a message somehow, and I'll suggest some times that we can get together and have a really good kōrero, have a really good chat about it.